Pretty topical comment for the times, understanding that in the middle of COVID-19, people have gotten a little more socially separated than they probably had planned on. But really, decentralization has been mounting for the last couple of hundred of years. I'm going to get into a slideshow we have here. Timothy Lewis. I have come from a strong development background. I've been in the fintech industry for most of my professional career, but really started building out networks in my preteens, and started working with cryptography in my early teens, and then building out networks for banks during my 20s and early 30s. In the blockchain industry, I've gotten involved with early Bitcoin, got involved with the crowd sale of Ethereum, got involved with a number of other networks along the way. A few years ago, I started a crypto asset hedge fund called Ikigai. And most recently, I have founded a organization called the Developers DAO, DevDAO. So decentralization, this is a word that I think is just so commonly either misunderstood or not well enough defined yet. When thinking about decentralization, we have to think about kind of where it comes from. Really, it's about being an organization, activities of an organization that are distributed and delegated away from a central authoritative location or group. People tend to use the term for different things in different meanings right now, and then they also judge the term on whether or not something is decentralized based on a number of different factors. And so I think that the word kind of is not yet fully understood. I think there are different levels of decentralization in different systems, and not really sure exactly the understanding of where this audience is and their understanding with and of blockchain technology and different instances of Byzantine fault-tolerant networks. But really, I'm going to go into a background of corporate structure first and kind of explain how we got to today over the last several hundred years. Really, corporations themselves didn't exist until the year 1600, or right around the year 1600, with the Dutch East India Company. And prior to that, there were these formations of entities that were primarily used for not-for-profits and for charters, primarily in England. The Dutch East India Company came along, and they were an absolutely asset-rich company. And for over 100 years, they ruled the land. They were a very, very strong organization. And the process that they took into creating this kind of corporate personhood, this ability to raise capital and then have this paper equity that was traded to signify that capital was replicated and often abused over that next several hundred years. One thing that I often talk about, I got my Series 7 when I was 18 years old in the United States that allowed me to be a broker for securities. The market for being a broker was never a honorable position, I believe. And prior to the 1930s, prior to some of the changes in the Securities Act of 1933, there was just so much raw abuse that came out of the ability for people to create their own value and signify that by a paper to trade. There were no central clearinghouses that existed. Really, that existed until the United States cleaned up a lot of it. The SEC had such a great role in changing and in transferring that abuse. The Securities Act of 1933 started some of that, but really there was state intervention and social activism that changed a lot of that in the 1960s, and then leading into the 1970s, the electronic markets. As we started to build better networks, wouldn't really it wasn't really the internet as of yet, but building better networks for connectivity, you had digital clearinghouses that started to come online, as well as National Security Clearing Corporation, and that the electronic markets were a place where at least you could have a place where people adhered to rules in understanding how to transfer these securities. And it's primarily US speaking, but also other countries adopted that practice. So the markets then really changed when we got to the internet and understanding the internet. And this is kind of when the digital market started to come online. The DTC and the NSCC merged actually in 1999 to become the DTCC, which is a clearing corporation that runs kind of the next generation of digital clearance for the primary financial markets in the United States. Although there are other organizations that do the same thing internationally, it really kind of changed the way that people were able to transact and be able to trust the transaction of things that they were buying into, the assets that they owned that they were purchasing. Fast forward to 2009, January 3rd, we had the creation of Bitcoin, and the Big B, the network, the blockchain, as it later became known, created a triple entry accounting ledger system that would allow us to eventually think about and contemplate the idea of further decentralization for digital assets and corporate equity, which is where we are headed now. So looking at the ways of trade that existed, paper trade primarily existed between the year 1600 and 1973. This, things, stocks, equities were all traded in paper function and were held in some reserve and had to be trusted. The electronic trading came around in 1973, primarily with the DTC and NSCC being formed, and lasted until the merger of those organizations. And this is, again, primarily America. But now we have the possibility of these cryptographic asset networks. And that's one of the reasons, one of the ways that decentralization will change how we earn, how we trust, and how we respect these corporations or these entities, these organizations, not only in one nation or one jurisdiction, but the possibility of being able to trust these types of entities or organizations in a global stance. So we really have to think about where we are in globalization and understanding different things that might affect decentralization now and in the short future from a global stance. And so when I think about business globalization, I think about jurisdictional evolution and understanding where we are now, understanding that the travel up until this last year has been more easy than it's ever been in the history of the world, and the blurring of lines between governance subsets and these lines of differentiation between governances is starting to become more apparent, and we're able to transact in a much easier way. So some of the ways that decentralization and now these decentralized networks and even the digital networks allowing us to communicate and send packages and transact business now on the decentralized networks able to create secure currencies is radically changing global business. Many people might be aware of, first off, the US dollar is one of the primary currencies used in trade in the world. When we create trade embargoes against other countries, either right or wrong politically, we're used to stand on that. It's a massive issue. Venezuela, for example, is trade embargoed from the United States. They were able to recently create the petro dollar, a crypto asset that they are able to trade in. Not very popular, especially amongst people that are wanting to follow laws and regulation of the United States, but it's an interesting change in the ability for people to transact. Bitcoin in Argentina and DAI in Argentina have become such an amazing part of their culture, an amazing part of the ability for humans to create a stable living. As in Argentina, the currency fluctuation of value made it very, very difficult for people to maintain stable level of work. Their currency has been so devalued, as many other countries have been. They've turned to creating different assets to be able to transact. So understanding that decentralizing currency and the ability to move currency is just such an important part of the future, and for some people where we're at now. This is not a primary interest, obviously, in the United States and other countries yet. In countries like the European Union and China, countries that have stable assets. But the idea that they should be creating these assets to be able to transist the networks, to be able to reach the people that are having difficulty with their own central bank currency is kind of the next evolution of this game from a central bank issuance perspective, you have the central bank digital currencies that will start coming online very shortly. The one that's probably most interesting and most developed now is the DCEP, the digital yuan, which is currently going through a testing phase. They did a 1.5 million USD equivalent lottery recently and have started that exploration, likely to be launching in 2021, the digital euro and digital yen. Other things that are of interest right now in decentralization, e-residency in Estonia, being able to create a more flexible residency plan. The Web3 Foundation and the work that's going on out of Berlin, the anti-encryption laws that are starting to pop back up into our society, one that is going to affect in Australia and the LAED in the United States. CDBC, digital yuan, this is an actual screenshot of the test product that's out now, but you'll have this, and really this is the new coldware, being able to put their yuan at the front center of global industry, global business, allowing it to be digitized, will really move their initiatives forward. And that's something that other countries and other people of interest need to keep an eye out for. Another part that's really moved things along is the understanding of free and open source software, and that the internet allowed projects like GNU, Richard Stallman's GNU is not Unix, software architecture, as well as Linus Torvalds Linux and Git, have allowed open source software to continue to eat up competition around and create more decentralized abilities for software engineers to collaborate. You've had then pirate networks that came out. Napster led into eDonkey and Tor. Tor is now led into the dark web. And you have very interesting collaborative, decentralized information sharing websites like Wikipedia now that are some of the best information resources in the world. Future of work, I mean, we've already got video conferencing, but again, that will be decentralized soon, definitely open source soon. Remote work will be changing the outlook and understanding of what cities mean to us and why we would want to live in cities. That will change. Currencies, being able to trade and transact in multiple different currencies from anywhere where you are is an important aspect of remote work. And equity, really being able to understand and have transparent views of what equity is and being able to treat equity potentially as something similar to currency in the way that we transact. So people can get paid in the equity of the organizations they build. The governance of these and the change in this corporate structure is happening now. We were moving from asset-heavy platforms and corporations like GE. We went through a period of these mixed platforms like Amazon and Apple. Then most recently asset-light platforms like Google and Airbnb, where you have less employees, but the employees are creating much more value. And all of these, they would have less corporate infrastructure and allowed more the end of the last mile participant creates more value for the organization. And DAOs are really the next in that evolution of intelligence platforms. We move from this shareholders to staff triangle to more of a flat organization of an intelligent platform that can route all the information and policy and financial aspects of a company. So to me, the future is DAO. These are autonomous organizations that have the freedom to govern themselves and control their own affairs. There really are none that exist in a jurisdictionally compliant way to date. So they're all at a legal arm's length currently, but work is being done to create jurisdictional compliance for these sorts of organizations. And they're really only about 6 to 7 years old. BitShares is arguably one of the first, or is one of the first, it's arguably the first. Most people are familiar with the DAO. The DAO was a famous, infamous failure due to some software issues, but an amazing organization, an amazing idea that really spurred this idea of these venture DAOs, or these venture organizations. Aragon creates a framework for people to be able to issue these types of organizations, and Democracy Earth has really made a popular machine for voting different things. The organization I founded recently, DevDAO, has taken in a very substantial grant from the Casper Labs network, and we're working on legal frameworks and technical frameworks for these organizations, and we're really excited to do that. Further reading, check out Cathedral and the Bazaar, check out The Starfish and the Spider for reading on decentralization. Check out the Valve Handbook for New Employees. It's a great understanding of flat organizations and how they should run. And also watch and read The Meritocracy Trap. It's a fantastic book. I believe I am out of time, so I appreciate everyone for tuning in today, and thank you. If you need anything more from me, it's at TrustLayer on Telegram, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Timothy Lewis, Ikigai.